I'm Janci Patterson. I've written mostly young adult. I have 8 books out that are young adult. I've also done some middle grade. I'm currently writing the last book in Brandon Sanderson's Alcatraz vs. the Evil Librarian series.
My name is Megan Lloyd. I'm a story artist and a screenwriter for animation. I worked at Skydance and DreamWorks, and I tried my hardest to save the Alcatraz movie adaptation, and unfortunately I failed. And I want to say I am sorry. Okay. My name is Devri Walls. I am a young adult fantasy author. I have written six. I don't know how many.
I know,
6 novels. 6 novels to date. Visitors is my first national distribution, so it's very exciting for me. And book 2 will be dropping April 30th. So coming up.
Okay, and I am Scott Savage. I started writing adult books about 18 years ago, and then about 9 years ago, I switched to middle grade, and that's what I do now. I wrote the Far World series, the Case File 13 series, the Shadow Mountain series, and then just a couple of hours ago, PW announced that I have a new series with Shadow Mountain called Wonderland Diaries. And so that's my newest one that'll be coming out in 2020.
I know, that
does. One of the things we first talked about was, just even before we kind of got started here, was young protagonists in books that aren't necessarily for young readers. So let's start with that concept of how do you define a young protagonist, and is there a difference in a young protagonist? If I have a 9-year-old protagonist in a book written for 9-year-olds or 7-year-olds or 6-year-olds, how am I going to treat that differently from a 9-year-old protagonist in a book written for adults? And we don't need to do like the 1, 2, 3 ABC. Just anyone jump in. And
I would say historically, from a feature animation standpoint, animation has actually done this not very well. I found out this week, to my supreme shock, that Princess Jasmine is supposed to be only 15. But it's something that's been slowly kind of turning back around in more recent years. I would say a film that I think has written young protagonists the most convincingly for their motivations, their wants and desires is actually the Captain Underpants film. And one of the reasons why that one was so successful is these 2 best friends. Their problem they're trying to get away from is not the destruction of their school or the world's going to end, but they might be put in separate classes. And the way the movie treats that is the worst thing in the world, and that's going to hurt them more than anything you can imagine, with such kind of like a genuine look on the stakes that young protagonists see their world. Like something to us that would be no big deal can be world-ending for a younger character.
I love that. That point of, the stakes, understanding what the stakes are at what point in your character's lives. Because it's like someone who is in middle school, it's life-ending when the guy you like doesn't like you. Right. Or you trip in front of him and your papers go everywhere and it's just mortifying and it just feels so horrific. And that was a great point. I think when you write for really middle grade, which I don't, but you do, the language is much more childlike. When you put a 9-year-old in an older book, you have to kind of mitigate that a little bit because an adult or a teenager has a hard time reading that, which is why it's hard to sit and talk to a 6-year-old for an extended period of time. So I think it's important to keep the stakes accurate for that younger character, but the language needs to change a little bit. Still be believable, but drop some of the caricatures, I guess, for lack of a better word. If they would do something 6 times, maybe have them do it once in the adult book.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good literary examples in literary fiction of books that are about a child but not written for children. Things like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Secret Life of Bees, where and to me the core difference is middle grade stories or YA stories are written to children in that audience, whereas the ones that are for adults, they're about things adults care about, right? There is a child. The child in the story cares because it's happening to them, but children don't care about these particular themes. They aren't the sorts of things that children are thinking about in their lives. They're more about adult issues, and that if you write a book that is about a child but has adult issues and then try to market it as YA or middle grade, no one is going to buy that.
And I think one of the things too is the filter that your character sees the world through. Like one of the interesting things about reading To Kill a Mockingbird through the eyes of Scout is understanding things that she may not understand completely. And so we're seeing that through a filter. And I think that in as you go from middle grade to YA to adult, that in middle grade novels, almost everything is discovery. It's magic, even if it's not magic. You know, the first time you take your kids to a zoo and have them see a real lion or something like that. You know, it's all this discovery. And then as you get into YA, it's kind of the disillusionment of discovering that all these things that you thought were beautiful and wonderful and good and magical might not be, you know. And then adult, a lot of times I think we see like I don't know, how would you guys define Ender's Game? Would you call that YA adult? I mean, obviously not middle grade.
I think in today's market it would be called YA, because YA has advanced quite a bit.
It's been sold in both places.
Yeah.
They shelve it in YA now.
I read it at age probably 7 or 8.
Yeah. Wow.
So I don't know, because I'm like, oh yeah, I read that, I loved it.
Yeah.
But I can see that my mom's in the back. I don't think she knows I was that young when I read it. But I can see that like some kids, it's okay to do more serious, like younger. But I agree that today, if it were released, it would definitely be considered YA.
And it's interesting how I think to some extent publishers position books in certain places. I read a book a while back for some awards, and one of the books that we read, there was a real conversation of, okay, this is being positioned by the publisher as middle grade, but it is not written at the same level as any of the other middle grade books. It really is clearly a YA book, even to the age of the character, but the publisher was targeting schools, and schools mean that you're targeting middle grade, you know, elementary, and you know, if you make it YA, you don't get necessarily the same position in there. So,
hey Jeff, I have a question. You know, we're talking about Ender's Game, which, for all practical purposes, this is a young protagonist.
yes.
It's very young, so it creates a problem. But it's actually being marketed as YA, so there's a disconnect, sort of. Is there not?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with you, because although Ender does start the book at 6 years old, his intelligence and vocabulary level is so much higher than children of that age range, that even though the book is about a child that age, it's not for that age group.
How about for a modern one? How about The Book Thief? Is that middle grade, YA, or adult? I mean, we could, right?
I just want to make sure we're not recommending that you start your protagonist at 6 years old and then try to market it in YA, right? This was sold as adult a long time ago, and now if you have a 6-year-old protagonist, an editor is going to look at page 1 and throw this away, right? Like they're going to say this is not young adult, and so like the genre conventions have changed just because they're taking a book that is wildly successful and shelving it in YA now to pull in the new audience doesn't mean you could sell that as YA exactly as it is today.
And I don't think there was really YA wasn't the category then that it is now.
No.
You know?
Yeah. It was strictly a sci-fi back then.
Yeah.
Adult sci-fi.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing too, is there is a difference now. If you're writing to publish traditionally, especially if you're writing to have your books placed in libraries and bookstores, everyone has to know where your book is going to be placed in the bookstore. Now, it can cross Harry Potter, you'll see in middle grade and YA, but in general, they want to know where are we positioning this. Yeah.
Is there a certain thing you should look for to make adults identify with your younger people?
So, first of all, let me ask you guys the question, because one of the things we talked about in an earlier panel that I was on is who your target audience is. So, if you are writing, and again, we're talking about different things, if you're writing middle grade, are you targeting it primarily to a 5th grade reader? If you're writing YA, are you targeting it to a high school reader? Or has that kind of gone away where you know you have more of a blend?
My blend's actually higher. So the question you're asking, I actually do have to kind of deal with, because I target towards high school, But because I'm at the upper end of that, my range actually skews up to like 30, 35-year-old little fan base there that I was not expecting to have. But when you have young protagonists, and that's the stretch of that base, you do have to be very careful and make sure that your younger people still appeal to the adult readership. My opinion on that is that if you use those characters to shine a light on a human condition, it's universal. So if you use those characters to shine a light on pain or insecurity or grief, regardless of the levels of that, the adults are going to still connect with those base values.
Also, we see the opposite of that happening in young adult, where 50% of the readership is adults. Yeah. And because the adults have more money than the teenagers, the protagonists are getting older and older and dealing with more and more adult themes. And there's been a lot of chatter in the industry about how we're doing teenagers a disservice because we're leaving them behind, because they aren't the ones with the buying power. And so it's both are true right now, that you can sell YA with very adult themes and that's an easy sell, but also then we're leaving this gap for the readers and doing this disservice. And so it's something that you have to balance if you're writing in YA.
And that was an interesting, in that same discussion, and Michael Brett, who's my agent there, was really involved in that discussion for a little while too. And one of the things they were talking about is that YA sales are struggling right now. That is a tougher sale. And so one of the questions is, have we stopped, like you said, have we stopped writing YA novels for young adult audiences? And can we go back and recapture that audience by writing themes that are more appropriate to them, instead of writing YA novels that really are YA
They're
for
adult
adults.
Novels about young people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They need a new adult category, and that's really where the problem is coming in. Because like this is straight up new adult. It's older themes, and I don't like that. I can't send my 12-year-old into the YA section and say pick something. I can't, because I've picked up multiple things and been like, okay, this is not YA. But there isn't another place for it is the problem, because those older NYA books are not adult, but they're not.
But let's discuss something too, because specifically you're talking about films, okay?
Yes.
And there are movies that I watch that are animated kids movies that I just can't stand. I know my grandkids are loving them and they're having a good time, and I'm just going, God, when is this thing going to be over, you know? And then there are, you know, How to Train Your Dragon or Pixar, you know, ones that I go in and the kids are watching it and having a ball, and I'm loving it too, kind of on a different level. I mean,
so in animation, we have television, we have feature, and television is structured a lot more similarly to book levels. So you'll have, for TV animation, you'll have preschool, you'll have younger children, or we call like newer watchers. Then you have its age range. Then you have 8 to 14s, and then you'll have, it bumps down a little bit, 12 to 18s. And that's who we go for in television, because it's much more targeted for ad sales and everything. But for feature, we try and go for something called a 4-quadrant movie, which is women above 30, men above 30, women below 30, and men below 30. And a really good feature film should be able to attract all 4 of those. And some of the most successful ones we've seen, the Dragons franchise, Kung Fu Panda, a lot of what Disney's done. Because the ones I think that drive you bananas are the ones that are made specifically only for children. Right. When instead we have ones with more heavier themes that are appropriate for children to watch.
yeah.
So for an animated feature like How to Train Your Dragon 2, raise of hands. Seen it? Okay, not seen it?
But I want to. I haven't got there yet.
Okay, then never mind. We'll pick the Lion King.
Don't spoil this for me.
We'll pick the Lion King. So, 20 years ago, Lion King is definitely a kids movie. You've got the potty humor, you've got the comedy, you've got the music, bright colors. It deals with the basically on-screen death of a parent. And it deals with a kid who's like grows up away from his family. These are really heavy and they can be really difficult. But one of the reasons why I think animation works so well is like it's couched in language that kids can understand, and that as kids grow up, they'll find different things in this movie that they're attracted to.
I had my agent at Harper when I wrote Zombie Kid, and I told this in the other panel, so I apologize if you guys were in there, but it was my first book that I'd done with Harper, and Harper sent me a box of their middle grade books, And so I read them, like, let me just go through these to get a feel if what I gave them is right. And all of them had tons of potty humor. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough potty humor in Zombie Kids. So I added a bunch of it. And then my editor took it all out. And I was like, oh, I guess I didn't do a good enough job on my potty humor. So let me try and make it better potty humor. So I tried it again, and my editor took it back out. And I'm like, okay, am I doing potty humor wrong here? And he said, no. He said, and I asked him, I read your other books, and he said, no, you're exactly right. I know my nephews would love that, and we do have a lot of that in our other books, but I believe that your writing is really smart. And he said, what I mean by that is, I believe that the gatekeepers, the librarians, the teachers, the parents are going to like reading Zombie Kid as much as kids do. And I'm afraid that if you put in a lot of potty humor, that you're going to alienate them. And that's why I'm pulling it out. And so I trusted him and I took it out. And that ended up getting a starred Kirkus review. It was a Junior Library Guild selection. It's probably my most awarded book so far that I've written. And so I think you have to know who your target is that you're writing for. But then I like that 4-quadrant idea. What can I do? I in my Far World series, I had 4 generations show up at one of my book signings, and they were all reading it, and they were all excited about the next book. And I said, so who introduced this? And it was actually the great-grandmother who had started reading it and introduced it all the way down. So.
Because real fast, more clarify for that, because for feature, we want the whole family to come to the theater, and we want them to like it so much that they will come back.
Right.
But for TV, you can just 9-year-old Amelia can sit in front of the TV by herself and enjoy her show that she's watching.
Exactly. That makes sense.
So that's why TV is so age specific and feature is more general.
That makes sense. And I can see that because I don't like watching like a lot of the Nick Jr. shows or stuff like that, that are, whereas I like most of the movies that we go see. So let's talk about character versus plot in different levels of books. So if we went from picture book all the way to YA, obviously you want to have a good story and a good character. But how much does that change based on the age of the protagonist or the reader, whether your focus is more on, this is a cool story about this with this kid who's like this, or this is a story about this character learning to do this in this situation?
Age, because a lot of the people who are upper class have the money to buy books are the people buying the books for their children, have children who are reading at an advanced level. And so a lot of the things that are aimed at those, not every child who is necessarily in this demographic could read this book, because generally the books are aimed on the high end.
That makes sense. So when you are looking at your protagonist and your protagonist motives, we talked about strong protagonists here. What do you do? I like Dan Wells, for example. So he wrote I Am Not a Serial Killer. And he's like, okay, so my main character, it's a YA novel about a kid who, for all intents and purposes, other than having actually committed the act, is a serial killer and knows he's a serial killer. He's researched them. He knows that he has all of the triggers, all of the checked off boxes to be a serial killer. And it's a great story, but he had to figure out how to make that character likable and sympathetic to the reader. So how do you, in your writing or what you work on, how do you create characters that the reader's going to connect with?
I am a heavy emotional writer. I write very big, very exciting things, but so much of my stuff is driven by emotion. And I think when you do that, it's really easy to get characters that are very recognized. Wow, I don't think anyone's ever said that to me before. Ever. Okay, I got this. How's this?
Quiet back here.
Yeah.
This room would be small enough not to need just a little bit.
Literally, my whole life has been Devri. Shh. So yeah, that's exciting. I know. I think that when you, like for me, when I write emotional based, which is just my style, and that's not everyone's style, and that is okay. But when I do that, it makes it easier to make even the villains or the protagonist that maybe is really flawed a little more likable because you have the empathy factor in play. even though you don't agree with them, and even though you can't say, I would do the same thing in that circumstance, you might be able to say, I get it. I see why that person is that way. I see why that happened. And so I lean heavily on that. And it helps that I'm an extremely emotional, empathetic person, and so I can draw that in. But I think it helps everyone, like someone will identify with someone in my book. Like there will be one character that you go, oh, yep, I've been through that.
I think a good example of how to make a young protagonist who is initially very unsympathetic into a very sympathetic character. There's a book, a young adult novel called After. I know there's a couple with that title, so I'm trying to remember the author, but it's not coming to me. But anyway, it's about this girl who is a mom who just previous to the beginning of the book has left her baby in a trash can. Right? So this is a very unsympathetic situation, and she's one of the most sympathetic protagonists I have ever read. And the way that she did it is she got right down in there in the psychology of this character and why she did what she did, and all of the reasons why she is the way that she is, and then gave her this beautiful redemption arc where she learns to take responsibility for her own actions. And so you can make anyone sympathetic. It just may be harder to make some people sympathetic than others.
But it's worth it.
It's worth it. Yeah.
What's that book called?
It's called After. There's a couple YA novels with that title. I can't remember what the author is offhand.
And I think a lot of it, too, has to do, you've got actions and you've got motives, okay? So from an action standpoint, I can have a character who's doing bad things, but I believe in them. There's a reason for it. So Hunger Games, without the motive, Hunger Games is the story of a girl who has to kill a bunch of kids to get everything she ever wanted, right? Okay? So if we want to make her more likable, let's step down a little bit and go, okay, well, she has to do that. She doesn't want to kill them, but she has to survive because everyone's trying to kill her. Okay, that's better. If she had been the one who had her name drawn for the Hunger Games, we could have rooted for her because she's trying to survive. She didn't choose to go kill these other kids. But what makes us super root for her is we see how much she cares about her little sister. And then her little sister gets chosen, and she puts herself in the worst situation she can imagine to protect her little sister. So that's a motive. But at the same time, it can be tricky because motive helps us to see it, but action, if I want you to like a character right away, have them go save someone or do something really positive or being chased by a bad person or whatever, and right away, I'm rooting for them. So how do you guys use motive versus action to pull me in?
There's a screenwriting book called Save the Cat, which I'm seeing some nods in the audience. It's funny, at the studios I worked at, we both follow that very closely and then also try to break from it like as far as we can, which is strange. But they bring up the actual phrase "save the cat" comes from your protagonist very early on should do something very sympathetic that endears you to them immediately, because then they can do any kind of crazy stuff, and you're like, but they saved that cat at the beginning of the film. So there's a joke about it in The Incredibles where like he stops what he's doing so he can shake a cat out of the tree. It's like a joke from that book that we all saw in the theater. We're like, hey. But something else we talk about is want versus need. And everything a character does is to get their want, to get their, okay, How to Train Your Dragon 1. No spoilers here. Hiccup wants to kill a dragon. That's what he wants so hard because what he needs is for his father to accept him. He ends up not being able to do anything related to his want at all. And at one point in the movie, his father disowns him. But the reason that movie's so emotionally satisfying is by like following his own heart and being true to himself. Hiccup attains his need at the end. So that could be something for, maybe your character wants to, I can't think of anything that a child would want. Your character wants to have a new bike. And so they smash piggy bank so they can have the money for a bike, and then they get thrown in, baby jail? This is
Okay, keep going.
I really want to know where this is headed.
Okay, well,
time out.
I don't either, but what the character needs is they actually need a strong parental figure who cares about them to even teach them how to ride a bike or something. And maybe that could be the police officer that arrested them and threw them in vapor.
Well, they are behind bars.
Yeah, so the mistakes your character makes going for their want, because that's, what we do as we're fully in pursuit of a goal, should lead them to a need that maybe they didn't realize, but the audience is like, this kid needs better parental care. And by the end, we're like, oh, I got that.
I think there are lots of ways to make a character likable. They need a redeeming characteristic, right? Not all redeeming characteristics, and things in stories that people tend to like. They like people who are competent. They like people who are active. They like people who are kind. And your character can get away with not being some of those things as long as they are other things. But if you end up with a super passive, whiny, incompetent character, now we've got nothing to like about them. So they don't have to be all of those things all at once. But I was watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine the other night with my husband, and we were talking about the main character, Jake Peralta, is really kind of a jerk a lot. But the reason he's so likable is, first of all, he's funny, which helps a lot. And second of all, he's so competent, right? He seems like he should be really bad at his job, but actually, when he is actually doing his job and not goofing off, he is so good at it. And so they get away with him being kind of a screw-up a lot, because when it comes down to actually doing what he's doing for the majority of the time, he's very good at it.
Yeah, I like House as a great example, of a really unlikable person who we like because he is competent, in what he does, And what Dan Wells did in I Am Not a Serial Killer is, first of all, he had the kid fighting against being a serial killer. So he recognizes what he is, and he's trying not to have any triggers that set him off. And then we meet someone or something, I don't want to give too much away, that's worse that he has to defeat. And so now we have a real villain. And I think that's one of the things we can do too is what is the external, what is the villain or the obstacle or the belief that our character has that they're trying to deal with that makes us root for them, which kind of goes back to your talking about being proactive versus reactive. What are they trying to accomplish?
And one of the awesome things about the main character and the villain in that particular book is that the villain, his characteristics end up illuminating John's flaws in a way that creates this meaning between them. And so even if you're not, you don't want to be best friends with these people, you're learning interesting things as they learn interesting things about themselves, and it makes that work really well. I just want to say also, I found the author for that book. It's Amy Effaw, After by Amy Effaw, E-F-A-W.
Did you guys hear that in the back?
No.
Okay.
Amy Effaw is the book that I was talking about after. The author's name is Amy Effaw.
E-F-A-W, Amy Effaw. Did we get it?
Probably no one cares.
And I am learning so.
Voices.
What?
I said use theater voices.
I happen to have been a theater major. I'm learning so much on this panel. You guys, seriously, I'm just like, oh, you guys are brilliant, and I'm working on it. But I'm always the panelist from the left field because my brain, I just feel like sometimes works a little different, and I like to share it because I can't be the only person whose brain works like this. So when I come up with story ideas, I'm never as organized as you amazing people that are like, well, this is how it flows. And I eventually figure it out. It just takes me longer, which is unfortunate. But for me, I will get flashes. I get movie flashes in my head of a character or a place. And so I will work backwards for the questions about motivation and how you make them likable and what made them this way. Once I get a character that I like, I will sit and take some time about in what place would this person be? What could possibly have made them this way? What characteristics, what life experiences? And then how can I go deeper? How can I make it the stakes higher and higher and higher by just kind of delving into those levels? And I get there that way. And it just, I don't know, it just works for my creative process better. So if that's beneficial to anyone in the audience,
I do that too.
Do you? Okay,
I also do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I actually, I co-write a lot, and my writing companion and we act out the stories with Barbies. Literally, we do this. She has a basement full of Barbie dioramas. And we sit there. It's kind of like D&D, right? We sit there, we set up the scene, and then we talk out the scenes, the dialogue. And so we go that direction in that the character did just say this thing in this scene. Why did they do that? And it's very interesting to me that, digging down deeper, your instincts as a person for what people do are there. You just need to get out of your own way. And the role-playing for us is a way to get out of our own way and to put together a plausible scene, and then we'll deconstruct it, and we'll figure out why they are that way, and then we have our like deeper emotional issues for when we write the book.
So you use the Barbies to get out of your own head.
Yes.
Guys, this is so smart.
It's awesome. I'm never going back. I'll never write a book any other way again.
So I use what nature has given me, and what that is traffic in Los Angeles. My commute in the mornings when there's bad traffic, it has lasted over 2 hours just going one way.
Oh my gosh.
Like, never let your car be below a half tank of gas, because you could get stranded on the 405 and then you could die. Anyway, you could That's the end. But what I've taken to doing is I will take voice memos on my phone. And although it's probably not safe to use Barbies while my hands are at the 10 and 2 o'clock position, I will start from that scene I love, and I'll talk through, who's in the scene, like, what's so evocative about this, and I will do chunks, and then when that's all done, my 2-hour voice file, I'll type it up, but try to string it together in chronological order, and then I go into my structural stuff and my thematic elements, but the emotional scenes come first.
The talking, I love the talking out loud, and I think that would help too with because we talked about the vocabulary for protagonists. Actually saying it out loud would be beneficial, because sometimes you read, like I always read everything that I ever write out loud, and if it doesn't flow, it has to be tweaked. But to make sure that the language isn't too much or too young or whatever, but also just for plot ideas. Yeah, my road trips are like, what if they went to that sucks? Maybe if they went over also really bad. Wait, and then eventually I hit on something that's working. It just is so helpful. I don't think I need the whole
You can pay someone you love, like a sister, like my actual sister. I pay her a certain amount of money an hour to transcribe what I recorded in the car on my way to work.
That's great.
That sounds
And I'm like,
horrible.
cut out anything about me screaming about the garbage trucks. But leave the stories.
There are also computer programs that'll do that.
There are computer programs that do that.
And that actually works really well for your viewers or your readers as well, as far as them discovering the depth to your character. Okay, that's what makes us care about characters. Think about Neville Longbottom in Harry Potter. First book or first movie, right? Totally minor, just comedic, not even comedic sidekick, just comic, okay? But the more we learn about him, the more we learn about his background and why he is who he is and what his hopes and dreams and what has happened to his family and everything, the more we care about it. We were talking about Hiccup with Dragon, or with How to Train Your Dragon, And again, the first thing is, this kid who wants to kill a dragon to impress, everyone and stuff like that. That's not something we can care about. But when we learn more and more about who he really is and why he's trying to do that, and like you said, his want versus his need, that's when we're like, wow, I'm really rooting for that character to succeed. Especially if his want and his need, or her want and her need, are in direct conflict with each other. Hunger Games. We want to defeat Peeta. We want Peeta to not be a friend and not like him, because he needs to die so that we can come back and take care of our little sister. But what we really need is someone else that we can care about, and to discover that the enemy isn't the other kids, So the more you can, you don't want to dump it right out, but if you really want to make the reader care about your character more, have them discover things they might not have expected about the character. Okay, so we've got about another 10 minutes here. Let's do some questions. Yes?
Okay, so speaking of Harry Potter is marketed as young adult books, but by the last book, I would say it's not at all. So what is your opinions on protagonists that grow older throughout the series and marketing them as young adult books when you know that the later books are not going to be?
That's impossible.
Actually, I think
really, because the thing you're running up against, it worked really well when she was releasing them, because the readers were growing with the series, which was fantastic. So great for the readers and everything. But then once the series is out, you do have a series with both middle an adult and they're binge reading them, and I don't. Is there a solution? I don't know.
Sell millions and millions of copies, and then you get your own section in the bookstore, and no one cares.
So you say series like Harry Potter. I find those to be the exception, and I find series more like Animorphs to be the rule, or Percy Jackson, where the characters do learn and grow and develop. Like Animorphs, 54 books. They were putting a book out every 3 months. Yeah, but the thing with those is those books did get way more serious as they went on, but they didn't get longer, and the characters didn't get that much older. So I think the answer is just like write true to your characters, and I would try to go for a consistent voice, because like you were saying that, yeah, your audience may grow, but once they're all out and published, someone's going to read them all in one go.
In young adult, too, it's customary for, in the last book of a series, for you to be ushering your character into adulthood. And so often books, I have a trilogy out, and I was putting it through my writing group, and somebody was new when I was doing book 3, so they hadn't read the other 2 books, and they were like, I would never have guessed this is YA, she's so adult. And she is, because it's book 3, right? She was not in book 1, we just grew with her, and when we get to book 3, now she's allowed to behave more like an adult, and that's pretty common.
And you're not, it's very seldom that you're selling a 5-book series or a 7-book series or a 3-book series unless you're really established. It's much more likely that you're doing a 3-book contract or a 2-book contract, that we know what the first book is going to be, but whether all the books of that series depend on sales. There are lots of series that never made it to book 2 or book 3. The reason that there were 7 Harry Potter books was because the first 6 sold so well. That's okay. So in The Shining, what makes it's not
it's Danny, right?
Danny,
It's been so long.
It's been so long since I read it.
I've seen the movie, but in the movie I don't find them to be all that likable.
I feel like the movie and the book are pretty different, because child actors aren't that good at acting yet. Some of them get way better. I feel one of the things that makes him maybe not likable, but definitely sympathetic, is that horrible things are happening in this house, and you want to protect him. You want to root for him, and you want him to get out alive. And I think that desire projected onto this kid makes him more of like a fleshed out and real character to you, because you're so invested in his survival. But his characterization, I wouldn't say, is what endeared me to him.
I think you have a kid who's very, very intelligent, but very emotionally young. And you're putting him in this incredibly dangerous situation. And I think those two do exactly what you said. It makes us want to reach out and protect him and take care of him, because, he's such a good person, but he's slowly figuring out what is going on around him, and it's terrifying, So, you had a question here, yes?
If you have in a middle grade book, if you have a character who has a markedly different lens that they experience the world through, kind of like the I'm not a serial killer. If you have a viewpoint character with autism or something similar to that, how do you go about writing it such that a middle grade reader who does not have autism, does not have anything like that, knows how to empathize with them?
So let me mention something, because we're talking about middle grade. Normally, middle grade is written from third person. And the reason that middle grade is normally written third person is because kids that young don't have a unique filter to the world yet. YA is often written from first person because they've got an attitude, they've got, history, they're viewing the world in a certain way. But there are certain middle grade books where that filter is key to the story. So in my Wonderland, about 5 minutes, okay. In my Wonderland Diaries book, I actually ran into that problem with the first book. My main character has dyslexia, and it's an incredibly important part of her story, okay? So I said, okay, I need to write this first person, which I don't usually do in middle grade. But then when she discovers that Wonderland is a real place and a very dangerous place, and she goes there, the stuff that Lewis Carroll created is so weird and so crazy. I mean, there's at one point we're in a sea of swimming numbers that are forming math equations, okay? I couldn't do that in first person because it wouldn't work inside their head. And I went back and forth, and finally we decided to do first person in our world and third person when we went into Wonderland. And it worked perfectly. But I think that if you're going to do something like autism, one of the first things to consider is what's your point of view? Are we seeing the world through the eyes of the autistic child, or are we seeing the world through someone, whether it's a narrator or a parent or whatever, who is not autistic and is trying to understand that person? Other thoughts?
For an example, I'm not sure I would dare to express how I think this person did this, but there's a middle grade book called Stuck in Neutral, and it's about a character who is literally a vegetable. His brain works just fine, but his muscles do not, and so he can't communicate. He can't lift his own head, right? And an entire middle grade novel written from his point of view, and it's extremely compelling. And it's first person, and you can't see anything he doesn't see. And we talk about characters needing to be active, and he literally cannot act, and yet it worked. And so that's when, if I was going to do that, I would take that and just like dissect it and figure out how that was done, because it was brilliant.
I would plant familiar in with your new aspect. So give your audience things they recognize. One of the things that I'm a Serial Killer did so well is they showed his relationship with his mom, what it's like for him at high school, things that most of our readers would find quite familiar, and in seeing how he saw them differently. So like his relationship at school, he has all these rules for himself to prevent him from acting on his impulses. And a reader would be like, well, I don't have to do that at school. And that would sort of open their mind to when your character who has autism is having a completely new experience, your reader can be like, I probably wouldn't react like this because I also reacted differently than this character did at school. So I think it's giving them enough familiar that when you branch out into the unfamiliar, the reader can sort of follow along with you.
And I love the rules. That's so important. Because I've written a character who was in a wheelchair. I've had different characters who have things they have to cope with. And all of the characters, if you talk to someone with autism or dyslexia or whatever, they have coping mechanisms. They have rules that they have built up to be able to deal with things. And so understanding, because they didn't just get autism yesterday. They've had it their whole life. And so they've had to come up with coping mechanisms and that's whatever it is that your character is dealing with. Let's do one more question, and then we'll just do kind of a quick, what we're doing next. Yes.
So something that I noticed is kind of talking about that familiar aspect. Middle grade fantasy will normally be real world. Child goes into fantastic element, child comes back to familiar aspect, and then YA can kind of get further behind, but you'll have like dystopias where the world's completely different, but there's still high school, right? Mm-hmm. So that there's still that familiar element. So I guess my question is are there other ways, or like how important is that so that because kids have to have something that they can hold on to, mm-hmm. right? How important is that familiar aspect for them if you're dealing in a fantasy or science fiction where maybe there is no school, maybe you're on a completely different planet, it's a secondary world or something like that?
I think it's extremely important across the board. Like when we read adult novels, we still want that familiarity of something, but I think people get really trapped in boxes with questions like this because it's, okay, well, I need high school, but I'm on this sci-fi planet. No, you need something high school-like. You need something where they go to learn that resembles this thing. And so if you can kind of dissolve those parameters a little bit and let your mind go looser, I guess, and just go with the broad. Like, we need somewhere where they learn, somewhere where they gather, somewhere. And that could be maybe military school. That could be, underground while they're hiding from the aliens. Like, there's just so many things that you could pick. Like, I want this to be the thing that is familiar, and then how am I going to do it in my world in a way that works and makes sense and I like as the author as well.
It can also be as simple as just a family, right? Yeah. You don't necessarily need school if that doesn't fit in the setting, but even just a family unit is familiar enough.
Like Aragon does not go to high school, but he does have a dragon, which is a lot like that he raises from an egg, and that's a lot like having a pet. A lot of kids can connect with either having or wanting a pet. So high school is your connection, family could be your connection. It wouldn't necessarily have to be school, but it would just be something that a kid can connect to and be like, oh, I've done that. Like, oh, I haven't ridden a hoverboard, but I've learned to ride a bike, and I can connect there.
Great. And again, find a way. If you've got rules, how do you establish those? Sanderson's arithmetist. Okay, we're in a different, completely different world, but it feels familiar because we quickly learn what the rules are and who people are that can use this magic and who can't. You know, and once we figure out those rules, then we kind of drop in and go, okay, we're okay here. But if you have very different rules in our world, you have to find a way to establish them without stopping the story and saying, oh, let me download, 2 chapters of backstory for you. So, all right, so this was great. Let's go start here at the end, Janci, and come down. What do you have going on that people should be aware of, projects or classes? Or
I'm going to go home and go to bed. I have a young adult science fiction novel that you can get for free on Amazon. I'll put the cards up here. Come pick one up if you want.
My name is Megan Lloyd. You can find me as Third Child Art, all spelled out as one word, on Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr. Most of what I do for work is still locked behind NDAs, but I do a lot of fan art in my spare time, and I feel like my tastes run alongside yours. I just did some Way of Kings storyboards of what a scene would look like animated, and I think some of you would enjoy that.
My name is Devri Walls again, because apparently there are no other Devri Walls. Everything's under my name, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, doesn't matter, just find me, website. I actually would like to, I am teaching a 1-hour class on Saturday that you all should attend because it's on how pacing your novel, but I'm teaching it through film to help eliminate all of the distractions, to help you actually understand and feel it. So it's a really fun class, and I'd love to see your faces there.
Awesome. And I've got a few more different things that I'm doing. The one that I'll just mention now is Saturday at 3 o'clock, I'll be doing a reading from the first book in the Wonderland Diaries series that I announced. So it's pre-editor even, so take it for what you will, but I'm kind of excited about it. So, yeah. And that is what I'm talking about, the girl with dyslexia, and in her head, that's that scene. All right, you guys were awesome. Have a great night.